Under the burning Atlanta sky, 47-year-old James Crow's ordinary evening turns into a nightmare when a police flashlight illuminates his face. A stop for suspicious behavior erupts into a confrontation where prejudice collides with a shocking truth. One man holds the key to justice, and the other holds the key to its collapse. Who will win the fight that will change their lives forever? The Philadelphia skyline burned with the deep oranges and purples of a late summer evening, the kind of sunset that made the city feel alive despite the weight of its history. James King, a 42-year-old human rights attorney, gripped the wheel of his dark blue SUV as he navigated the bustling streets of Center City. His day had been a marathon, hours spent in a cramped courtroom, arguing a case against a corporation that thought it could bury its discrimination under a pile of legal fees. Now, all he wanted was to get home, kick off his polished loafers, and see his daughter Sophia's smile. The radio hummed low, a jazz station cutting through the hum of traffic, a small rebellion against the chaos of his day. He slowed at a light on Broad Street, the yellow glow flickering just as he eased to a stop. Perfect timing, or so he thought. Then, like a predator pouncing from the shadows, red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror. A sharp siren wail sliced through the jazz, and James's stomach tightened. He glanced back, his dark eyes narrowing as a police cruiser pulled up tight behind him, its grille practically kissing his bumper. "What now?" he muttered under his breath, adjusting his tie as if it could shield him for whatever was coming. The cruiser door swung open, and out stepped Officer Michael Reed, a 28-year-old rookie with a buzz cut so sharp it could have doubled as a weapon. His badge glinted under the streetlights, a tiny star of authority pinned to his chest. Reed adjusted his duty belt with a swagger that screamed overconfidence, his boots hitting the asphalt with a deliberate thud. He approached James's window like a hunter stalking prey, his jaw set and his pale blue eyes already scanning for trouble. "License and registration," Reed barked, his tone clipped and heavy with an edge that didn't match the routine nature of the request. James rolled down the window, the cool evening air spilling into the car. He reached for his wallet with a steady hand, pulling out his driver's license, then leaned over to the glove box for the registration. His movements were calm, deliberate, years of practice keeping his composure under scrutiny. He handed the documents over without a word, meeting Reed's gaze for a split second. The officer snatched them, his fingers brushing James's with a roughness that felt intentional. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Reed asked, leaning closer, his breath faintly sour with coffee. His eyes darted over James, lingering on the tailored gray suit, the crisp white shirt, details that didn't seem to soften his suspicion but sharpen it. "Not really," James replied, his voice even, polite but firm. "I stopped at the light. Was there something else?" He kept his hands visible on the wheel, a habit born from too many stories, too many warnings from his father decades ago. "Don't give them a reason." "You didn't stop clean," Reed said, though his tone wavered, like he was fishing for a justification he hadn't fully formed. "Looked like you were in a hurry." He straightened up, folding his arms, the documents still clutched in one hand, as if they were evidence of something bigger. James tilted his head slightly. "I was heading home. No rush." His words were simple, but there was a quiet strength in them, a refusal to shrink under the weight of Reed's stare. The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped back, his boots scuffing the pavement as he paced a small circle beside the SUV. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, chest puffed out, like he'd decided this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. "Where you coming from?" Reed asked, his voice dropping lower, probing now. "You don't look like you're from around here." James raised an eyebrow, a flicker of irritation sparking behind his calm facade. "I live 10 minutes away. My address is on the license." He nodded toward the documents in Reed's hand, but the officer barely glanced at them. Reed's eyes narrowed, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but close enough to set James's nerves on edge. "Yeah, well, I'll be the judge of that," Reed muttered, stepping closer again. "Step out of the vehicle for me." The command landed like a punch, sharp and unprovoked. James's grip tightened on the wheel for a fraction of a second, his mind racing. He knew the drill. Knew this wasn't about a light anymore, if it ever had been. This was something else, something older, uglier. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" James asked, his tone still measured, though the air between them thickened with unspoken stakes. Reed's jaw clenched, his hand drifting toward his belt. Not quite to his holster, but close enough to send a message. "I said step out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The threat hung there, raw and unmistakable. James exhaled slowly, his breath steady despite the adrenaline spiking in his veins. He opened the door and stepped onto the street, his 6 feet 2 inches frame towering slightly over Reed. The suit didn't hide his broad shoulders, but his stance was unthreatening, hands loose at his sides, eyes locked on the officer. Reed smirked faintly, gesturing toward the hood. "Hands where I can see him." James complied, his palms pressing against the still warm metal of the SUV. He turned his head just enough to catch Reed's gaze. "Looking for something specific?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. "Just routine," Reed replied, though the gleam in his eyes said otherwise. "Can't be too careful with guys like you." The words slipped out, heavy with meaning, and for the first time, James's calm cracked, not into fear, but into something sharper. He straightened slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Guys like me," he repeated, letting the question hang like a blade in the air. Reed froze for half a heartbeat, caught off guard, but he didn't back down. The tension snapped taut between them, electric and dangerous. This wasn't just a stop anymore. It was a collision, one that would leave neither man unchanged. The Philadelphia street pulsed with the distant hum of traffic, but on this stretch of Broad Street, the air felt suffocatingly still. James King stood beside his SUV, palms flat against the hood, the metal warm under his hands as Officer Michael Reed circled him like a vulture sizing up its next meal. The rookie's boots scraped the asphalt with every step, a grating rhythm that matched the tightening knot in James's chest. Reed's earlier smirk had faded, replaced by a hard, unreadable mask, but his eyes, those pale blue darts, kept flicking over James, searching for a crack, a flinch, anything to justify the itch in his trigger finger. "Keep those hands where I can see 'em," Reed snapped, his voice tighter now, laced with an edge that hadn't been there before. He stepped closer, close enough that James could smell the faint tang of sweat and cheap cologne. The officer's hands moved fast, patting down James's suit jacket with rough, jerky motions, less a search and more performance. His fingers lingered at the pockets, tugging at the fabric as if he could will something incriminating into existence. James didn't move, didn't stiffen. He'd been here before. Not this exact street, not this exact cop, but this dance. Too many times. His jaw stayed set, his breathing slow and deliberate, even as Reed's palm slammed a little too hard against his ribs. "You're clean," Reed muttered, stepping back, the words dripping with disappointment. He wiped his hands on his pants like he'd touched something dirty, his lips curling faintly. For now, James echoed, turning slowly to face him. His voice was low, steady, but there was a spark in it, a quiet challenge that made Reed's shoulders twitch. The officer straightened up, his hand drifting toward his belt again, hovering near the radio, clipped there. James caught the motion, his dark eyes narrowing. He knew what came next. Escalation. Always escalation. Got a smart mouth, huh? Reed said, his tone sharpening as he closed the gap again. Guys like you always think they can talk their way out of anything. The words hung heavy. The guys like you, landing like a stone tossed into still water. Ripples of meaning neither of them could ignore. James tilted his head, just enough to lock eyes with Reed, his calm exterior a steel wall against the officer's growing agitation. Guys like me, James repeated, letting the phrase linger, his voice soft but cutting. You mean men in suits? Men driving home after work? Or is it something else, officer? The question was a blade, precise and unrelenting, and for a split second, Reed faltered, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. But he recovered fast, his face hardening into a scowl. Don't play dumb, Reed shot back, his voice rising. You know exactly what I mean. He jabbed a finger toward James, stopping just short of his chest. I've seen your type. Too slick, too confident. What are you hiding? The accusation was flimsy, a fishing line cast into the dark. But Reed doubled down, his breath quickening. Maybe I should call this in. Get a second pair of eyes on you. James didn't blink. Go ahead, he said, his tone flat but laced with something dangerous, a dare. Call it in. See what happens. The words weren't loud, weren't angry, but they carried weight, a quiet promise that shifted the air between them. Reed hesitated, his hand freezing mid-reach for the radio. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes, a crack in the armor of his bravado. What's that supposed to mean? Reed demanded, but his voice cracked at the edges, betraying him. James didn't answer right away. He straightened up, brushing a speck of dust off his sleeve with a casualness that felt like a slap. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, watching Reed's hand twitch toward his holster. Relax, James said, his voice cool as he pulled out a slim leather wallet. Just my credentials. He flipped it open, revealing a crisp attorney's ID, the seal of the Pennsylvania Bar Association catching the streetlight. James King, Esquire, civil rights attorney. He held Reed's gaze, unyielding. That's who I am. Now tell me, officer, what's this really about? Reed stared at the ID, his mouth opening, then closing like a fish gasping for air. That's bullshit, he stammered, snatching the wallet from James's hand. He squinted at it, turning it over, as if it might vanish if he looked hard enough. Anyone can print one of these. You think I'm stupid? I think you're digging a hole, James replied, his calm unshaken. And I think you're about to find out how deep it goes. The threat was subtle, wrapped in that same steady tone, but it landed like a punch. Reed's face flushed red, his grip tightening on the wallet. He tossed it back at James, who caught it midair without breaking eye contact. You're not scaring me, Reed growled, but the tremor in his voice said otherwise. He keyed his radio, his thumb shaking slightly. This is Reed. Need this. The Philadelphia night pressed in, the streetlights casting long shadows over Broad Street, as Officer Michael Reed stood frozen, his radio crackling faintly in his hand. This is Reed. Need backup at Broad and Spruce, he barked, his voice tight with forced bravado. James King leaned casually against his SUV, arms folded, the attorney's ID still dangling from his fingers like a loaded gun he hadn't yet fired. Reed's eyes flicked between the ID and James's unflinching gaze, his earlier swagger crumbling under the weight of something he couldn't name. The air buzzed with tension, thick and electric, as if the city itself held its breath. Reed took a step back, his boots scuffing the pavement, his hand still hovering near his holster. You think that fancy card changes anything? He sneered, but the words sounded hollow, a desperate grasp at control. I don't care who you say you are. This isn't over. He jabbed a finger toward James again, closer this time, almost daring him to react. But James didn't flinch. He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, not mocking, but knowing. It unnerved Reed more than any shout could have. Careful, officer, James said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the static of Reed's radio. You're on thin ice already. The warning was subtle, but it carried a chill that made Reed's jaw clench. Before he could snap back, the growl of an engine broke the standoff. Another cruiser rolled up, its lights flashing briefly before cutting off. The door swung open, and out stepped Sergeant Carla Ellis, a wiry woman in her late 40s, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. She adjusted her cap, her dark eyes scanning the scene with the precision of someone who'd seen it all. Reed, what's the situation? Ellis called, her tone clipped but calm as she approached. Reed straightened up, puffing out his chest like a kid caught misbehaving, but still trying to look tough. Got a non-compliant driver, he said, nodding toward James. Acting suspicious, mouthing off. Might be more to it. Ellis's gaze shifted to James, and for a split second, recognition flashed across her face. She stopped mid-step, her brows lifting slightly. King, she said, almost to herself. Then louder. James King. Reed blinked, confusion creasing his forehead as James nodded once, slow and deliberate. That's me, James replied, his voice smooth but edged with purpose. He slipped the ID back into his pocket and pulled out his phone instead, holding it up so the screen glinted in the light. And this, he added, tapping the display, is a recording of everything that's happened here tonight. Audio and video. Crystal clear. Reed's face drained of color, his mouth falling open as the words sank in. You can't do that, he stammered, lunging forward as if he could snatch the phone away. Ellis shot out an arm, blocking him with a glare that could have stopped traffic. Stand down, Reed, she snapped, her voice like steel. She turned to James, her expression softening just enough to hint at respect. You're that James King, the one who took down the 17th precinct last year over those unlawful stops. It wasn't a question, she knew. Reed's head whipped toward her, his eyes wide with dawning panic. Exactly, James said, his tone cool but unrelenting. And I'm working on something bigger now. A case against this department. Systemic profiling, abuse of power, the works. This, he gestured between himself and Reed. This just became Exhibit A. He tapped the phone again, locking eyes with Reed. You didn't just pull over a driver, officer. You pulled over the guy who's been waiting for someone like you to slip up. Reed staggered back a step, his bravado dissolving into something raw and frantic. This is bullshit, he spat, but his voice cracked, betraying him. You're bluffing. That recording won't hold up. There's no consent. Pennsylvania's a one-party consent state. James cut in, his words sharp and final. I consented. That's all it takes. Maybe you should have brushed up on the law before you started throwing your weight around. He slipped the phone into his pocket, his movements calm but deliberate, a predator playing with its prey. Ellis crossed her arms, her gaze shifting to Reed with a mix of disappointment and warning. You've got a history, kid, she said quietly. 3 complaints in 6 months, all swept under the rug. Looks like that rug's getting pulled out from under you now. She glanced at James. He's not just any lawyer, Reed. He's the one who makes careers end. Reed's hands balled into fists, his breath coming fast and shallow. You're all against me, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. This isn't fair. Fair, James interrupted, stepping forward just enough to close the gap Reed had left. His voice dropped, soft but piercing. Fair is when a man can drive home without being treated like a criminal for no reason. Fair is when you don't assume I'm a threat because of how I look. You don't get to cry fair when you're the one breaking the rules. His eyes bored into Reed's, unyielding, and for the first time, the officer looked small, exposed. Ellis cleared her throat, breaking the silence. Reed, get in the car. We're done here. Her tone left no room for argument. Reed hesitated, his face a storm of anger and fear, then stalked back to his cruiser, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Ellis turned to James, her expression softening. You're really going after the whole department? James nodded, his jaw tight. Someone has to. He glanced at Reed's cruiser as it peeled away, tires squealing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The reckoning had just begun. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of James King's modest office in West Philly, casting sharp lines across his desk. Papers sprawled everywhere. Case files, police reports, handwritten notes. Each one a brick in the wall he was building against the Philadelphia Police Department. Last night's encounter with Officer Michael Reed played on a loop in his mind, not because it was new, but because it was fuel. James leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, the weight of the fight settling into his bones. His phone sat beside him, the recording from Broad Street uploaded and backed up twice, his ace in the hole. He'd already filed the formal complaint by 8 a.m., attaching the audio and video as irrefutable evidence. Reed's voice, sharp, accusatory, dripping with bias, echoed in his ears as he'd reviewed it one last time before hitting send. But this wasn't just about Reed. It was about the system that let him thrive, the one that buried complaints like dirt under a rug. James knew the numbers. Dozens of excessive stops in the last year alone, most targeting Black and Latino drivers, most dismissed with a slap on the wrist. He'd seen the pattern too long to let it slide. By noon, he stood before a packed community center in North Philly, the air thick with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs held residents. Mothers clutching photos of sons stopped too many times, workers in worn jackets, teens with wary eyes. The mic crackled as James stepped up, his gray suit a stark contrast to the room's faded walls. "This isn't about one night," he began, his voice steady but resonant. "It's about every night someone drives home wondering if they'll make it without a badge, turning their life upside down. Last night, that was me. Tomorrow, it could be you." He played the recording, Reed's words. Guys like you always think they can talk their way out, drawing gasps and murmurs from the crowd. A woman in the front row, her braids pulled tight, shook her head. "That's my brother's story," she called out. "Stopped 3 times in a month. No reason." James nodded, letting the room's anger simmer. "That's why I'm here," he said. "Not just for me, but for all of us. This department's got a problem, and we're not letting it hide anymore." The backlash came fast. By afternoon, James's inbox overflowed with messages, some supportive, others venomous. A deputy chief called, his tone slick with veiled threats. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, King," he warned. "We can handle this internally. No need to drag it public." James cut him off, his voice cold. "Internal's how it festers. You had your chance." He hung up, staring at Reed's file on his desk. 5 complaints in 2 years, all resolved with no action. The rug was thick with dust. That evening, he met with his team, 2 junior attorneys and a paralegal, huddled in a diner over coffee and case law. "They'll try to bury it," said Mia, a sharp-eyed lawyer with a knack for digging up dirt. She slid a folder across the table. "Reed's not alone. Look at this. 10 officers with similar patterns, all protected by the same brass." James flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. "Then we go bigger," he said. "Not just Reed. The whole chain." The next day, he faced the press outside City Hall, cameras flashing like gunfire. "This isn't personal," he told the swarm of reporters. "It's systemic. Officer Reed's a symptom, arrogance bred by a department that shields him. I've got evidence, and I'm not stopping until every voice ignored gets heard." A reporter shouted, "What about retaliation?" James's eyes darkened. "Let them try. If it festeres." Behind closed doors, the department scrambled. A leaked memo showed brass pushing for a quiet settlement, cash to make James disappear. He got the offer that night, $50,000 and a gag order. He laughed, tossing in the trash. "Justice doesn't settle," he told Mia over the phone. "They think I'll fold. They don't know me." The community rallied harder. Protests popped up outside the precinct, signs reading "No more Reeds" and "Accountability now." James spoke at one, his voice cutting through the chants. "This isn't chaos, it's clarity," he said. "We're not asking for revenge. We're demanding reform. Training that works, oversight that sticks, consequences that matter." The crowd roared, but he saw the doubt in some eyes. Years of broken promises weighing them down. Back home, he sank into his couch, the TV flickering with news of his crusade. His daughter Sophia climbed beside him, her small voice breaking the silence. "Daddy, are you in trouble?" He pulled her close, her curls soft against his cheek. "No, baby," he said. "I'm fixing trouble. For you, for everyone." She nodded, trusting him, and that trust lit a fire he couldn't let die. The fight was on, messy, loud, and unrelenting. Reed was just the spark, the system was the blaze. James wasn't backing down. The Philadelphia air buzzed with the weight of change as James King stepped into the dimly lit hearing room at police headquarters. Weeks had blurred into a storm of depositions, protests, and late-night strategy sessions, but today was the reckoning. The long table held a panel of stern-faced officials, internal affairs, union reps, a deputy chief with a scowl etched deep. Officer Michael Reed sat across from them, his uniform crisp but his posture slumped, eyes darting like a cornered animal. James took his seat, his gray suit a quiet armor, the folder of evidence in his hands a weapon forged from truth. The hearing began with a thud of formality. Dates, times, badge numbers recited like a script. Then James stood, his voice steady as he laid out the case. On August 23rd, Officer Reed stopped me without cause, he said, clicking a remote to play the recording. Reed's voice filled the room. Guys like you always think they can talk their way out, drawing winces from the panel. James didn't flinch. This isn't isolated. It's a pattern. 5 complaints against him, all ignored. How many more didn't file? Reed's lawyer, a wiry man in a cheap suit, jumped up. This is entrapment. My client was provoked. James met his glare, unflinching. Provoked by what? Me know my rights? Driving home, he slid a stack of papers forward. Witness statements, similar stops, a damning trail. This isn't about one night. It's about a system that let him think he's untouchable. The room fell silent, the panel exchanging uneasy glances. Reed shifted, his face pale, his bravado long gone. After hours of testimony, the verdict came. Suspension without pay, pending termination. Reed stormed out, muttering curses, but James stayed, his gaze on the panel. This isn't enough, he said. Punish him, fine. But fix the root, training, oversight, accountability, or it's just noise. The ripple spread fast. By week's end, the department caved under public pressure. New training protocols, civilian review board, body cams mandatory. Not perfect, but a start. James watched the announcement on TV, a rare smile tugging at his lips. The deputy chief's face was stone, but his words were clipped. We're listening. It wasn't a win handed over. It was one wrestle from their grip. That Saturday, James stood at a podium in Fairmount Park, the crowd sprawling across the grass. Families, activists, cops in plain clothes. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold. Justice isn't a gavel or a badge, he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. It's us, holding the line, demanding better. Not for revenge, but for trust. I fought for that. We all did. Applause erupted, loud and raw. But James stepped back, letting the moment belong to them. Later, he sat on his porch, the city's hum a distant lullaby. Sophia climbed into his lap, her small hands clutching a drawing, a stick figure him, a shield in hand. You're a hero, Daddy, she said, her eyes bright. He chuckled, brushing her curls. No, self. Just a guy who didn't quit. The real heroes are out there, still fighting. She hugged him tight, and he felt the weight lift, just a little. The next day, he walked into his office, a new case file waiting, another stop, another story. He sighed, but his resolve hardened. Reed was gone, but the system wasn't fixed. Not yet. At the precinct, a rookie watched the news, his hands fidgeting. That could have been me, he muttered to a veteran, who nodded grimly. Better learn from it. Across town, the woman from the community center, braids tight, eyes fierce, tucked her brother's photo away, a flicker of hope in her chest. The protests had quieted, but the sign stayed up. No more Reeds. James's words echoed in her mind, a chance to make it better. She believed him. Back home, James cooked dinner. Spaghetti, Sophia's favorite. The TV off, the silence welcome. Will it stop, Daddy? She asked, twirling a noodle. He paused, honest. Not all at once, but we're moving it forward. For you. She grinned, and that was enough for tonight. The fight wasn't over. Never would be. Not fully. But this chapter closed with a promise kept. Justice didn't just win, it grew roots. James looked out at the skyline, the city breathing easier, and nodded to himself. One step, then another. That's how it's done.